Hi, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Impossible World podcast. Maybe I should bring this closer, because we don't need all this dead space for, Welcome back, also to the Impossible World podcast. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that should be somewhat good. Also, coming at you guys with a boatload of green tea, and my thing fell off, shut off. Wonderful. Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Impossible World podcast. Also, let's just try to add some more oomph to this. We're starting off this with a bang. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Impossible World podcast, the show and or podcast that is all about fostering your creative mind and or just rambling at you about things that I think are neat in terms of storytelling. We're also trying to build a world for you to play in and mess around with. This is a crucial part as well of the story thus far. This is the end of Hell Night. I think we're on chapter 9 or something, but it's chapter 9, the end of Hell Night. Now, of course, this, again, is going to be a moment where it heavily, this is pillar 2, probably. Pillar 1 is the idea of, on Halloween night, everyone becomes monsters that they dress up as. And if the monster is too powerful or too crazy, then their body breaks, but if they're strong enough, then they'll attain the monster power, whatever it is, right? And then this is pillar 2, which is the end of Hell Night, setting up basically phase 2 for the world. Kind of like the alley-oop for us to go ahead and dunk. So anyways, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us begin. This is also going to be very, very busy. We're going to have a lot of stuff and beats to hit. Hopefully we can hit all of them, and let's begin. Alright, so I think last time, if I'm not mistaken, yes, I tried to introduce basically the idea of Crowley noticing or knowing that the main character, Grimm, is is not exactly what he portrays, which is, again, it's kind of like the old classic Omen, which I really like a lot, but it's for people who really like to help others, which we'll see more in the future from Grimm and etc., and who likes to kind of guide people who are struggling and etc., they oftentimes are as broken as the people they choose to help, as to maybe find themselves along the way kind of mentality. So I really like that, and this was my way of also giving Crowley a relic that has kind of suppressed his chapter 1 issue, where he just kept projecting this malice and making people go crazy. Well, if he wears this ring, it quiets that completely. It also makes him take on the role of this shadow-like figure that is puppeting people and etc. But also this gives Crowley having the outlook on Grimm of I'm not gonna let you dissolve into the background. I'm not gonna let you go without being rewarded and stuff like that. Which I think is neat because it kind of plays with a cool kind of friendship dichotomy a little bit, where Grimm is the person who's just kind of cheerful and leading the charge, so to speak, but Crowley's the person that makes sure that both of them are taken care of in a way, and also is that voice of reason in a sea of selfless nonsense a little bit sometimes. But anyways, that was what we did last time. But last time we left off on, alright, so our boys finally got out of the weird tomb thing. They got into Crowley's badass classic car, and whoosh, they're off to the races. At this point, they both look at each other and basically communicate that, hey, I'm no longer feeling any sort of very, very strong pull, and this was a pain in the ass to get. Also, I'm tired, basically. They both agree that they're both exhausted. And let's say, right around this time, Grimm's belly starts growling with his new wolf-found hunger, which we'll get into at a later date. So, of course, Crowley makes a suggestion to go stop and get some food. So they go to a broken-down convenience store. It could be a broken-down fast food place. Crowley makes his way in there, notices that everyone's gone, and he basically goes over the counter, makes himself some shit, leaves, and then they are onward and upward. They find themselves towards this nice little mountain peak overlooking the entire town, a nice place to relax, and unplaced sounds ricocheting all around them, echoing in the night sky, as well as just being generally still terrifying. It still very much has the monster aesthetic everywhere. I would love if you guys could keep that in the back of your mind, where these people are weirdly just chilling and they're starting to flow with madness, but madness is still a thing. Again, bats, witches cackles, monster screeches, all this stuff is still happening around them, but at this point, Grimm and Crowley both basically have done enough to give themselves enough courage about the environments that they're in. Like, like they've been through all these horrible dungeons, gotten all these relics, they feel confident a little bit, and also capable of what they can do, which I really would like to hammer home, because I feel like in a lot of novels it doesn't quite feel that way. Oftentimes I feel like the characters never change, the characters always stay the same bleak little terrified person, which I don't want that to be the case for our characters. But anyways, so yes, they eventually get to this thing, and this is what I seen way back in the day. Again, everything that I've explained to you guys, I ironed out the first 3 days I thought about this, the first 3 days of the podcast. Yes, but it's just the whole process has been us figuring out the in-between parts, and then me having seen media that I like, and then trying to implement some cool things. Also, we have coffee, not just tea. Cool. All right, so we need to start making our way, because there's a lot. So ultimately, this is just a place where Crowley and Grimm both kind of connect again with the idea of they survived Hell Night. And as they look across the city with maybe burning pyres here, a broken down building far there, all these crazy things, they both reminisce about the night and how they recognize that so much has happened. In what feels like 2 days, it was only a couple hours, which was not the case. And I would like to mess around with the idea that Hell Night felt like was a night, but time was altered in a sense, and it was actually like 2 days, or not even 2 days, but like 24 hours maybe, just like a full crazy long thing. And we'll get into why that could happen and potentially make sense. Anyways. So yes, our characters are sitting there reminiscing about the night again. Crowley basically having been thrown away, backstabbed, and then finally, along when he was just about broken, meeting Grimm, and then Grimm the same way, kind of stumbling through the night, not understanding what's going on with him, and then finally he found somebody who was equally as lost as him, but together they found that they were less lost in the world, yeah? So of course I would like to keep adding on to that kind of trope in the future. Well, actually we have, throughout the whole series, we have kept adding to that trope. And in between all of them, basically whenever they're in the car, I would have loved for them to be looking through their skills and to be kind of amping up the game aspect of the world. But I don't want it to be like too video gamey where it gets all kind of like nonsense, but I would like it to be like, these things that we know about in our culture, whether it be comic books, games, monster movies, have some sort of semblance, but they're not like 100%. They're only like an idea of something that could potentially exist. So I like that idea. But again, maybe when they're sitting amongst the city, eating food, shooting the shit, being friends and whatnot, they're looking through skills and they're chit-chatting about that. But alas, they reminisce, they eat some food, they relax. Crowley notices that Grimm inhales his whole meal, as well as offers to give him half of his, because he's just not that hungry, he finds. So then he of course, Grimm eats all of it. And we're getting at the fact, I'm not going to spoil it, which it's pretty obvious what's happening. But anyways, I would like there to be a nice moment where maybe there's a moment where Crowley wants to talk about, bring up the thing with his ring and the fact that, wanting people to forget him and having this kind of weirdness with Grimm. But he doesn't, of course. Maybe something interrupts, maybe a scream happens. Alas, they both come to the conclusion of, all right, well, I'm tired, really tired, where are we going to go? So the Grimm speaks up and says, well, I don't think we can go to my tiny apartment because, of course, I bashed through the last thing I remember is me bashing through my window. So he's like, I bet it's cracked in, probably not a good place to stay. Also, my apartment was in the middle of town, that kind of thing. Being in the eye of the storm, not a good idea. So anyways, Crowley says, sure, we'll just go and sleep in my apartment, whatever. So then they go there. And this is the kind of point where we need to get by, because this is not the stuff that I want to dwell on too much. But again, point one is they had this kind of nice moment where they're overlooking the town, taking in and reminiscing of all their relics. Again, Crowley getting his cane, Grimm being the first one to get his necromancer kind of skill tree, and then, what was it? Then Grimm got his werewolf skill tree, basically, and then Crowley got his cane, and then Crowley got his ring, which is also his skill tree. Listen, then the arm, the ring, there's so many things. They reminisce about it. The reason why we're pushing through this so brutally is because I know that the part is going to take so long. I know this part is going to take so long that we're about to get to. Anyways, so of course they arrive at Crowley's apartment. They get up there. Then Grimm brings up the reality of, there's screams and there's monsters, and what do we get? Like, do we do shifts? Like, how are we gonna make it through this time? Do you want me to stay up while you go to sleep, and we'll take shifts and whatnot? And then Crowley says, "I got you, boy. Guess who's a craftsman and can piece together random pieces of tech for plot convenience? This guy," says Crowley. He doesn't break the fourth wall, but anyways. He basically comes up with this device that is like this orb, kind of like a little Earth, I think of it as. That he sets down on the table, and it kind of lightly spins. And Crowley says this thing should detect whenever anything with a hostile intent is near us, and if anything is to come into contact in a 120 foot radius, it will catch and halt that force. So basically, like a dome, like a grid around them, kind of thing. Cool. So Grimm's like, holy shit, yeah, boy, this was a huge problem, and now we're safe. Grimm sleeps on the couch in the apartment, and then Crowley goes and sleeps in his bed or whatever. These parts are irrelevant. It's just that they're safe for the time being, as well as they're good in that sense. Okay, so now the night has come to a close, and yes, Hell Night has officially ended. But right as it's about to become morning, our main characters experience a dream. Now, what in the hell could you be meaning, Grin? Well, for people who are following along in terms of like wanting plot points for me to hit, and for us to kind of do together, just in case some of you guys might be like, I like it when you do the plot points because that way I could change an aspect of that plot point easier. Essentially, we need to set up why the ever-living Hell Night even happened, which we explained in the beginning of the whole story, part 1. Essentially, one of the things that I really want to get to is the idea of the demigod. And I was thinking about it a while, like, I don't want this to be some sort of like, I want this to be a way when it comes to like, you know in storytelling there's like this cataclysm happens, and sometimes there's cool stories that basically happen where like this bad thing happens, but then there's this random person that gets affected and they contribute greatly to the main story. But then there's this other thought pattern which exists in storytelling, which is like you are connected to the thing at whole, to like the sum, like the destiny kind of plays a part almost. Like you were always meant to be this kind of thing. Which I like the idea of doing that with Grimm specifically, and then maybe even Crowley to be the alternative, for like Crowley to be the person that like shapes his own destiny, and Grimm to be the kind of person that just like fate favors him, in the sense of like only this person could have achieved this because of the previous life standard that they had, experience that they had, and yeah. So the way that I wanted to do this is with a dream. So of course, Hell Night's raging, people are screaming, people are changing into these creatures, not too much death is happening. I want to kind of stray away from that. I just want it to be like this sense of utter madness, like mayhem, everything's being thrown around, buildings are breaking, people are screaming, people don't know what the hell they are. No one's, again, evil by nature. They just have all of these extra abilities and situational things that they have to deal with now. But it's not like you are just evil because you're a vampire. It's just like, hey, you have a greater sense of sense and you're a bit stronger, and depending on what kind of vampire you are, you have various different traits. And you, guess what, crave blood now. But you're not to the degree in which you're like a ravenous animal. But to the point where you're like, oh, I really like this. That kind of thing, you know? I don't want it to be too straight and narrow. In the heights of this chaos, this demigod is watching all these things come undone, and he's quite joyful about the way he's orchestrated everything, right? Like these people that used to make fun of the very creatures that I value and think are so wonderful, are now becoming the very thing that they mock, right? And I really want that to be the sense that you get from the demigod, or the I don't know. Demigod doesn't seem like a right word, because he's definitely not demigod. He's like a god, like a person that's able to reshift it, and the whole system, you know, is messed or powerful. So in the heights of the Hell Night happening, and you know there were a few others around the globe who actually achieved, who like completed getting in their skill tree, but no one, or very few, let's just say that two individuals caught the interest and the eye of the demigod as he's laughing at his own justification of justice, or sense of understanding of justice. Human beings treated monsters so terribly, haha, now you're them. He notices there's these two that are just chewing through at all of his encounters that he made. And he's kind of shocked at how efficient they are, and the fact that everyone else is nuts. Like, in comparison, these people are crazy, but that also makes them all the more interesting. So he, of course, in the dream, reaches out to them. So, of course, the Grimm and Crowley both go to sleep, but, of course, Crowley makes it there before Grimm. Maybe because of the werewolf keeps him a little bit up, or just the combat experience of Grimm being up close and personal keeps him up, whatever. Regardless, Crowley's the first to go to sleep, but of course Crowley gets pulled into a dream. And this dream is basically Crowley waking up in a room that is completely blackout room. You're completely in darkness, but you find yourself at a desk with a chair sitting there, with this tiny little light, like a noir interrogation of a criminal kind of feel. This spotlight right on the table. So Crowley looks around. He's like, what's going on? This is freaky. And he feels a sense of presence, despite it. He can't see anyone around him. This lady with glasses and unmarked special features, I guess. She's not just like, it looks like a normal girl, I guess. Kind of like an older woman, looks like a secretary kind of vibe, blonde hair, that kind of thing. That's what I see, at least. Blonde hair, glasses. Yeah. So she scoots a chair up to the same table, sits down, and she has a pen and paper with her, basically, like a clipboard. And Crowley speaks up, kind of like, what's going on? And she's like, I appreciate it if you answer the questions as honestly and as quickly as you can. So then she clicks her pen and puts her pen to the board and looks up at Crowley and says, insert 1,000 different questions that we could come up with whenever. To me, it's questions along the lines of, how did you experience your night? And then Crowley goes on to be like, Crowley probably fights it a little bit and says, like, wait, like, where am I? First of all, like, this is not, we're not just doing this. But then eventually Crowley caves and he says, he just starts answering the questions, like, how did you feel about tonight? And Crowley's like, it was stressful, but most of all, I guess I'm felt with the presence of feeling proud that I was able to get through it and to excel, I guess, in getting through it. So question after question. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about beings that look different, that may have scales? And how do you feel about that people who, an affinity for blood or something? And basically Crowley finally figures out that she's asking about monsters, and Crowley says, I don't care. I could care less about what the hell kind of weird shit you have going on with you. which is kind of like, to me, it's a way of... It's good, but it's also Crowley's way of being selfish about, like, I don't care what's going on with you, I got my own shit, fucking leave me alone kind of mentality, which I feel like a lot of people can relate to. It's not that you're like evil, it's just that you don't care about other people's problems because your shit's horrible too, But ultimately Crowley at this point is just speaking his mind. How do you feel about monsters? I could care less. How do you feel about your newfound being, your newfound demon nature? And Crowley says, there is no nature, I'm still the same person I am. Kind of spits back at her in that sense, again openly speaking his mind, despite he does feel like he is, he does feel like he's still at a disadvantage. What's the word for it? Vulnerable. He still feels vulnerable in this black room, in this place that he doesn't know where he is, and etc. Feels kind of alone, doesn't know how to really feel about it. But at last, the lady's questioning ends. She clicks her pen and she says, she gets up and walks away. Doesn't say thank you very much. And Crowley kind of tries to stand up and says, wait, where are you going? Like, what's next? Do I get to leave? You can't do this. Like, and then as he says, you can't do this, there's ominous voice chuckles and starts laughing, like this deep guttural ha 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 kind of thing, comes from behind him. And this voice, after laughing, says, oh, I can do whatever I want. And then this light that's on the tables pivots and shows that there is this big again, this is what I see, but I see this Cthulhu level monster that's like Cthulhu, like he's a squid monster, but he's like a Ariel's from like The Little Mermaid, Ariel's dad, who's like this half fish man kind of thing. I see the opposite of like Poseidon, like normal legs, human legs and all that kind of stuff. Maybe wearing like more darker clothing, but with a giant like tentacle beard, kind of like Davy Jones a little bit, except with longer hair, kind of like Thor. Anyway, I see like an amalgamation, but ultimately it's this being that's chuckling at basically Crowley's brashness, I guess. And anyways, this is where I could tell you guys a pillar that I do want to hit. Basically, I want for Crowley to point out the hypocrisy that is existing within this demigod, because essentially I want the demigod to basically explain what's going on, his plan. He explains his plan in great detail to Crowley about how human beings are these selfish people who devour themselves for no apparent reason, as well as make fun and pick on things that they don't understand. And act with such hubris that it's just disgusting. And for him to explain that this was my goal, this was my hope, is to show you guys how the very thing that you make fun of, you become. But I also wanted Crowley to be like the person who's a little bit more cocky, a little bit clever, a little bit in that sense, to throw it right back at the demigod without like fear, without nothing, just throwing it right back in his face. Like Crowley, I think, would. And essentially, I want Crowley to basically say that, like, in a nutshell, this is the most hypocrisy I've ever heard. And I thought about this in the midst of my, like, thinking about this demigod, but it's, wait, so you're complaining that human beings kind of made fun of monsters and painted them all with like this broad brush about, like, they're all, witches or cackling evil, eat children kind of level vibes, and demons are these evil, pure evil villain people, and vampires are these bloodlust, sex crazed kind of monsters, and we all made all these blanketed statements or thoughts. But you did the very same thing with human beings. You thought that every single one of us was hateful, and not any little girl who dressed up as a witch for Halloween, even a witch with a crazy giant nose and moles on her face. She didn't think that was the coolest fucking thing to be. Like, you didn't entertain that idea at all. You threw your like preconceived judgment on us the same way we did to them. Like, you're no better than us kind of thing. And Crowley's saying this in this arrogant, cocky way of being like, you dumbass, you're just an idiot. And I want this demigod to basically be like, go bullshit. There's no single human being that could love XYZ or truly think that there's this. And in his frustration, the demigod casts Crowley out, preaching those words that you're lying, there's not a single human being that exists without prejudice for monsters, so to speak. And as he casts him out, he in a kind of a grumpy slumber says, send his friend in. And as Crowley hears that, he starts quietly chuckling, like, okay, bitch, like you're about to meet the very person you said couldn't exist. So for these kind of weird plot, like, again, this is very much playing off of the trope that I sometimes like when it's done in a certain way, which is destiny. But we'll get into it in a little bit. But essentially, the same thing happens to Grimm as he's pulled into this dream. Finally gets to sleep. He's pulled into this dream. He's in this room. Where it is all same thing as Crowley, this pitch black dark room with a spotlight on a desk, and he's sitting in the desk, and then this lady comes up to him and starts interviewing him, basically asking him how Hell Night went, and he explains in vivid detail all of the things, but unlike Crowley, who's a little more brash and etc., the person who's taking the notes starts cracking smiles, because Grimm is immediately, without hesitation, the most honest he could possibly be about everything. Because Grimm, let's just say this: Grimm thinks he's talking to his psyche. he doesn't realize that he's pulled into a god realm, talking to God helper and God. So, anyways, Grimm starts rattling off about how badass he thought he's seen a a snake person crawl up the side of a fire escape and into a building. And he thought that was so dope because they didn't know that snake people had that much, could like stick to walls or some shit or weirdness. He's just going on and on about how badass these monsters were, and that how he's seen this monster, that monster, and this monster, and they had this trait and that trait that they did, and he wonders if this trait happened, or that this could be possible. Basically just fanboying about the monsters. And also being honest about his encounters within the world, about how he was terrified. He doesn't quite know what he is, nor how to manage what he is. But ultimately, he's just very unapologetically happy about all of these monster facts, and that he's been looking at them and studying them and interested in them for such a long time. And finally, as much as he's sad that everyone had to go through these horrible things, there's this other part of himself that's like the nerd part of himself that loves monsters in general, and etc. And they very much get that vibe when she's interviewing him. So unlike Crowley, the lady stands up and smiles and says, that'll be all. Someone will be with you in a moment. And she gets up and walks away. And at this point, I think I want Grimm to be like, wait, but I wasn't done talking to you about all of these things. So he kind of is like, wait, am I not, I wouldn't walk, if I was in my subconscious wouldn't just fuck off. So he kind of and I want him to look around and be like, oh, I don't think this is my my brain, my awareness, myself. So as he's looking around, he looks back, and there is this old man. At least this is what I see. I see this old man with gray hair, wearing this old rag sack level quality of material hood, with his giant beard, and he's smiling. And yeah, just a very old disheveled man, creeps up, or he's sitting on the table as Grimm looks back. Also, unlike Crowley, the demigod and the interviewer are both like, holy shit, this person seems pretty genuine. So then, of course, unlike Crowley, where the demigod was laughing at his arrogance and his self, not only did Crowley take him down a peg, but now what Crowley said is he's directly faced. The demigod is directly faced with this reality of okay, maybe there isn't a person, or maybe this kid's just lying. All right, let me test him. So then this old man sits down. Or he's there, and he starts asking Grimm questions about monsters, and well, what about this and this? They're like, what about a snake? Like a snake hybrid? I don't know. I'm not the most flushed with monster knowledge. I just like the idea of this weirdo super knowledgeable about this weird thing. But anyways, he questions him greatly about all these things, and ultimately at the end of his questioning, he realizes that no, this kid is 100% all in, to an obsessive level, to a weird level, a creepy level about monsters. But I also want this to be a moment where you crack the lens of God a little bit. The demigod, who's taking shape as instead of this Cthulhu level monster, he's taking the shape of this old man, for his facade to basically be cracked as well. And the more him and Grimm keep talking, as he keeps questioning him, he keeps getting more and more giddy. The demigod keeps being like, yeah, well, actually, this monster has this affinity, and they can only copulate with these people, and turns out that they were actually found from this. And he just starts going in, and then Grimm, with wide eyes and interest, is listening to him with bated breath, and keeps egging him on about asking him different questions, and they answer each other's questions, and it's just a weird back and forth, like kind of a stupid fanboy meets other fanboy, and they just start dishing about this. Things they loved so much, and it'd be a cool moment in storytelling to show that this big horrible monster god was actually just a fanboy of his not his creation, but his observation of something that's similar to him. And sure, let's say that Grimm even asks oh well, are you a monster or something like that? I mean, you're wearing this clothing maybe to hide something, and then sure, let's say that the Cthulhu monster quickly shows his face, and unlike Crowley, who was a bit taken back and grossed out by this kind of squid-like form, the main character's like, fucking dope as shit. That's wicked. And then he transforms back to the what do you call it, old man, and chuckles and laughs. Yeah, I have it written here. It says, the man pulls his hood down to reveal the very same demigod. So maybe that's when he actually reveals that he's this squid like thing. Anyways, so at this point, I would love for them to again for him to explain, like unlike Crowley, where he's like preaching his amazing plan, for him to instead be explaining like, I really love monsters just as much as you do, and I've loved observing them for as long as I could. The demigod is saying this, and then he says to Grimm, my plan was to show humanity that these people aren't what you think they are. Just because you were born with these inherent things does not mean you're inherently evil, or not without depth, or not without character. So to say that just because you are these things isn't fair, and I wanted to show people that was that. Kind of, I want to have been taken aback, almost like he kind of acknowledges that, like, his plan and understands like the pain and the he doesn't like that either. He's not a fan of like the fact that people make fun of and kind of glorify that, the poking fun at something that maybe otherwise be different. But he also acknowledges that, like, for him, it's not about that. It's about glorifying these things that are different, these things that are odd and unique and yeah. So yeah, Grimm sat there silently for a moment, and then urged the demigod that not all humans are like that, but also that some are sadly corrupted, do that, do have prejudice, and do poke fun at something that is looking different, So the demigod is actually refreshed by his honesty in this moment, to the idea that, again, unlike just saying, like, human being like Crowley, who was just like, not everyone's like that, you're an idiot. Instead, Grimm's like, well, I see what you're saying. Some people are good and other people are terrible. Like, and then the fact that Grimm acknowledged that, humans have the capacity for evil, it was refreshing to him, that honesty. So as Grimm kind of sits there puzzled by the situation and kind of not sure how to feel about it, like he loves monsters, he loves all these things, but he doesn't like that everyone was kind of, like not everyone hates monsters, not everyone has that prejudice in their heart, but yet this person judged all of them in that way. But as he's thinking about this, trying to think about like this morality kind of question, he's brought back to a question that he thought to himself in the midst of Hell Night. And he keeps getting distracted by this question. But alas, the demigod, pretty observant, notices there's something that's bothering Grimm. This thought that keeps ringing in his head. So Grimm tells the demigod about the moment when he used his powers, that it wasn't so noble, and that he just wanted to live, and that he hated that. And this is referring to something that we kind of talked about in the beginning, of like, I'm not sure if I really got into it, but it was the moment when they finally went to get Crowley's relic, his skill tree, his ring, in that house for the first time, because he never really used his power outside of that, besides the wolf just tearing through all those undead at his necromancer's relic kind of thing. Anyways, but the feeling he got when he first activated that like burst power kind of rush thing wasn't that of like nobility, or at least I don't think it was. Maybe I might have said that, but I think it was a mixture, if I'm not mistaken. In that part, I mentioned that it was this moment of responsibility for both bringing Crowley there, but also not wanting to die. Also, it was like this moment of I don't want to die, but I do not want to leave this person that I brought here to die, but I also really don't want to die. So it's like this back in between of, I don't want to run, but I don't want to die. I want to move forward. I want to survive. I want to live, and I want to make this person live as well, because it's my responsibility, because I brought him here. And then in the heights of those emotions, boom, he starts to channel that werewolf, and then shuts it down really quick, because he's trying to like reclaim control, because he feels himself boiling over. And that kind of being the thing, but and this kind of happened, I think, in a different place where we talked about it. Yeah, I don't know where it was. Oh, right, that was where the other thing that really like cemented this home was the moment in the graveyard, the Lich King moment. But it was the moment in the graveyard where he's trying to get his summons to act, his summons to move. So in the heights of trying to get his summons to get their ass moving, it couldn't. But he was filled with this selfish as hell thought process, which is, how dare you try to kill me? How dare you try to beat me in this game that is trying to survive, that is life? I probably did a much better job of explaining it then, because I thought about it for many weeks. but for that to be kind of the premise, but also for that to be kind of like a hard pill to swallow. Like you weren't heroic because you wanted to do heroic things. You were heroic because you found this carnal aspect of your brain that is, I want to live, and how dare something try to kill me? You know, how dare you want to push me? Okay, well, I'll push back 50 times harder because I want to live more than you. There's like this carnal desire to not want to give up. And to push all of that forward, awaken the Lich King, but also is not the nicest thought. It's not a heroic thought, I guess I should say. So anyways, he confides us to the demigod, and the demigod says, I have it written here that says, the demigod leans back and sets off a big laugh, rumbling the world around him. While leaning back, he goes to tell Grimm that he found the one thing about monsters that he truly loves. How they fight tooth and nail just to survive, never questioning if it is right or wrong. Because that is the purest thing. Because everyone has the right to cling to life. They may not win, but you should sure as hell try. And I love this so much. Because again, I talked about it in that one part, but it's the idea of, you know, you're not like, again, the idea of like, I have the right to survive and live is not a thing. You know, if you think about like what you truly deserve, and in contrast what other people are given, you realize that you don't deserve much of anything, and the fact that you do have what you have is a byproduct of you pushing as hard as you can to get what you can. You know, it's not like a beautiful thing. It's like a harsh thing. But that thought to me is powerful a little bit, because it's something that you see everywhere in nature. The idea of something clinging to life. They may not win, but they at least sure as hell should try. So for me that's a powerful thing. And again, to me, I could see that being this true thing that's always existed, this trait that's been here since the end of time or beginning of time. To where this demigod would see that in any realm and be like, well done. Like these things are just clinging to life, and they're not getting all about the morality of it, but they're just fighting to survive. That's what they do. That's what they want. And if coexisting was a thing, they would choose it. So the demigod explains all this, and he kind of talks to Grimm about it, and he says like, it's okay. Like this is something that it's okay. Like if it was you. Or the person that you loved, or maybe if it was just you and another person, it's not evil or wrong to choose you, because like what you do not want to love something ever again. You know how good loving something could feel. You know how good eating something could feel. You know how good seeing something funny could feel. You know why would you want to throw that away ever? You know, I'm not saying despair can't devour you alive and depression can't eat you. I'm just saying that like generally. If you're in a good headspace, I think most people would choose to cling to life, right? I think people fall apart when they try to control life, though. But anyways, that's not what we're talking about right here. But anyways, he reassures Grimm that like this is okay, and this is something that he didn't want to talk to Crowley about. So this is something that he's building up for a while. So then finally, when he kind of lets this loose, he's like, all right, like this is nice, this is helpful. And then what else do I have written here? Because I wrote a lot. I actually probably should have just read this verbatim, because this is actually way more clean than me rambling about it. But I actually did like write almost a story like in my notes. Yeah, and he reassures him that like it's okay to feel this. If anything, I think it's the purest thing to feel, and to hang on to that, because that will be the thing that takes him farther than any will could ever. But alas, the demigod thanks Grimm for his company and tells him that he's given him a lot to think about. Now let's go over something real quick. Just because I don't think I actually did a great job about squeezing it in there, but I wanted it to be like this thing where, Crowley came at the demigod from a perspective of, you're a hypocrite. There's like so much hypocrisy here. You're nuts. How dare you judge us all with some sort of blanketed thing? Very same way you judge us for judging monsters. And for him being very like boasting and like throwing it back in his face. And then for there to be this other force. So it's kind of like good cop, bad cop in a weird way. I didn't even intentionally try to do that, but it kind of turned out that way. So then we have Grimm, who's just like painfully human, honest about his absurd love for this very same creature, fanboying all the while, only to invoke the same kind of fanboy-like personality that the demigod has. But in this instance, I want him to explain his plan to Grimm, and not through like the guise of like a villain explaining his master plan to the hero, but instead, well, he did that for Crowley, but now for Grimm, he's explaining it to him as a friend, as a fellow monster lover, who's like, these people are beautiful and unique in their own way, and that this is such a neat thing that people don't give enough credit for, and here's all these things. And then for Grimm to kind of be like, I totally agree. And then for him to explain his plan. And for Grimm to kind of be torn about like, well, not all human beings see monsters in that way. And it's kind of sad that now we're all kind of thrust in a world that we don't know how to handle or understand. Especially when, there was a lot of innocence in that. A lot of innocence in the world about like people who didn't deserve this, people who were just like me, or even an eighth of what I am, who just appreciate monster movies and enjoy those kinds of things. And don't have prejudice in their heart, even a little bit, and who would accept all of these things, this and that, as long as we're not like in danger, then we're probably would be pretty, open about it. So that's what the conversation that I don't think I got across very well in the midst of all that I want, because it's important, because that kind of harkens back to the demigod kind of saying, I have a lot to think about. So let's start putting along, because we're still dragging ass a little bit. They both wake up with only the faintest understanding of that dream. Grimm sees Crowley cleaning his guns and says good morning. So as Crowley is cleaning his gun and Grimm says good morning and all that, Crowley says here, and he passes him a kind of a square device. And essentially Crowley says, hey, so you know how you gave me your phone? Because this was something that I wanted to pay forward. I did it way back. I think it was when Crowley was first, Crowley was without a weapon, and he needed a car, so he asked him for his phone, and he morphed it into a quick lockpick kind of thing that could open up any car, and he just cracked it open, and Grimm was kind of like, what the fuck happened to my phone? And they just started putting along Hell Night. But this is Crowley being like, hey, by the way, I'm actually able to make you something 10 times better than a phone. It's got 50 times the memory. You're always connected to the internet. Nonsense, crazy, craftsman bullshit. So he gives him this badass, crazy, high-tech phone. Cool. I just thought it'd be something nice to pay forward, as well as there being this kind of, this moment where again, Crowley's still trying to pay forward. Grimm is kind of heavy lifting of most of the Hell Night. Not most, but just a good bit. Anyways. Regardless, there's this quick rumble that just starts taking hold of the whole city. Sure, this earthquake, and at first it thrashes them really quick, and then it kind of settles to a rumble. So then Crowley and Grimm say, "What the hell is that?" And they bolt to Crowley's apartment, top of his apartment, and they're overlooking the city as they see kind of things start to shake, and their phone starts beeping with a voice that sounds familiar, and it's that same female voice that was interviewing them in the dream, that blonde lady with glasses. And of course it says emergency, please see important message. So anyways, he pulls up his new phone, same with Crowley, and they both are listening to this very familiar face. It's this Cthulhu level monster. Again, this is one of those things where to me it doesn't matter too much at all. It could be whatever you think this demigod could look like. I think of the iconic Cthulhu, but a hybridization of Cthulhu and an old man wizard kind of looking thing. Maybe that's just me, but anyways. And the long and short of it is that they did it. Him and Crowley both basically saved humanity from the nightmare scenario that we could have very well had in this weird world that I'm making. So essentially, Crowley shows the demigod that his hypocrisy, the fact that, again, he judged him so terribly, as well as he met Grimm, which is this kid who is, if anything, an identical parallel to the demigod, who is just fascinated with monsters and how interesting they are. But also, what Grimm said about how not every human being is great, but some people are just like him. They're love monsters that don't have any malice in their heart when dressing up, and that there are also some horrible people, some bad people. So then the demigod basically comes to the conclusion of, okay, well, if that's the case, then I can't go back on what I did. And that's what the demigod says in this little kind of interview, message to humanity in the world. This is my whole reasoning why I did this, because you made fun of monsters. This is your punishment. But it also has come to my understanding recently that not all of you are so judgmental and evil. So for that matter, I give you one final gift to humanity. Something that should help with your transitionary period of becoming monsters. So, what do I have right here? But he also says that someone out there has changed his mind. And he also says that he is sorry to say that he cannot change you all back, humanity back. That the level of mutation would simply be too much for your puny, weak bodies. Some of you who decided to dress up as gods fucking died because your bodies were so weak. Moving on. Another, rule. Anyway. So, instead of, changing you all back, I'm going to help you with a transitionary period for you. He says with a godlike jovial laugh, with a beard shaking, tummy rumbling, that he is offering you gifts. And these gifts come in the form of peak survival. What he means by this is he says that now across all of the world that there are these giant tombs, mountains filled to the brim with loot, with relics, with items of grandeur, all filled with corrupt and menacing beings, truly evil in terms of their character. On top of these special areas that now hold relics as well as enemies, and challenges to face, there are now shops perked up all over the world that are going to sell you things that will help rein in your newfound monster nature. Food, items, random things to give you an edge if you do choose to go into the field. Now, you will get 2 to 3 months worth of supplies to relax your monster nature. So essentially, what this is, just to explain, to not go into dialogue, because I'm really terrible at doing dialogues, right? I'm better at writing it. But anyways, regardless, basically what the demon dude is getting at is he's kind of meeting Grimm halfway, where again, he understands that the idea of, okay, well, I can't change you guys back, but what I can do is make this transition easier. So I'm going to give you guys shops, vendors that sell specifically things that can help you with an endless supply of those things. But I also do like the idea still of that thing that I love so much, which is the ability for survival, the ability for you to fight to survive, to want to keep going and surviving, etc. So he breaks it down to in this video of saying you get 3 months basically of, if you're a vampire, you get free blood. If you're a werewolf, you get whatever kind of monsterism you have, you get this for 3 months free. But if you want to get more, you have to go into these areas of worth, into these tombs, into these mountains, into the waters, these temples, whatever you want to call them. Tombs, doesn't matter. Regardless, you have to go into these tombs, and when you defeat enemies, you will gain this currency that is going to be dropped from the fallen enemies, from these fallen enemies. He's saying that is going to be the thing that you're going to need to pay for. So this makes sense canonically with the lore of it, which is, again, this demigod who likes the idea of, if you want to survive, you have to fight to survive. And it's not wrong to feel that way. It's also a good way to understand what you are now, to fight and understand what your limitations are and all these things. So that's canonically kind of like the overarching theme that we're now set in. This is Act 2, if you will. So both Hell Knight ends, this demigod sees these two champions, if you want to call them. They're just these people who are just mowing down Hell Knight. He talks to them and realizes his own kind of arrogance in his judgment. Especially when talking to Grimm, because if Grimm was just as brash as Crowley, it wouldn't have worked out. It just would have probably been worse. Anyways, regardless, Grimm basically spun a deal unintentionally for humanity, basically being like, okay, well, just so that you guys don't rip each other to shreds, here's a place where you can really harness what you are now. Not only that, but I've put treasures and relics and things of grandeur in it. So there's plenty of loot in these tombs. Also, here's a place that sells you what you need now, that you don't have to kill a human being to get blood if you're a vampire. These vendors are connected to the whatever. It could be this dimensional this dimensional business kind of thing, which is like there's a dimension where human beings just breathe and they squirt out blood from their mouth, and we just get all that blood and we just bring it over here. It doesn't matter. That's like Rick and Morty level nonsense. But it's just something that I think is not important. Now there are vendors spilling out over the entire world that have basically 1,000 different things. We'll get into that in the next part, because him and Crowley will basically go and visit one of these vendors. But along with that, there are these giant tombs, and the one that's in Crowley's area, city, or whatever, is basically this I don't know. I see it kind of as like a tiny Colosseum, but it goes deep. It goes real deep. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is like kind of Act 2. That's like the most important part. Like that's Pillar 2. Essentially, what happens if there was this magical being, whatever, that was godlike powerful, that had this preconceived judgment on humanity, that turned everyone into monsters when Halloween night happened, and then Halloween night was a place for you to basically understand what you were a little bit. Most people just didn't understand it at all, went crazy, but there were these two weirdos who made the best of it. And because they made the best of it, they have reaped rewards, basically. They've got their skill tree, they've got an understanding of what they can do. They are also going to be one of the first people to get into these tombs. But anyways, then the Act 2 happens, which is Hell Night ends. The demigod confronts these two warriors, these champions, whatever. And then he comes to the conclusion of, okay, I made a mistake, but I can't kind of take back my mistake. But what I can do is basically make it easier for Grimm and people like Grimm, which is the sooner you accept who you are, is the sooner that you'll go into the tomb, you'll fight for your life, you'll understand what it means to live. And how it's okay to want to survive. And in doing that, you will find peace, acceptance, friendship, because you'll be forced to make parties and all these things. And that is essentially Act 2. Is all over the world right now. There are tombs, like that's where the earthquakes were. Tombs popping up, mountaintops being covered in mist, dungeons left and right, as well as now there's a bunch of these random, like I'll explain in the next part, but it's basically, like a what do you call it? Like an old class fantasy kind of wagon. Yeah, well, there's a monster in that wagon with like lights all around the wagon, trying to sell you shit. Like, hey, are you a vampire? I got blood that's A grade, son. Get over here and buy it. Here, oh wait, never mind, it's free. Yeah, just take it if you want it, I guess. Fuck. So he's waiting for the time when he can actually pay for stuff, which him and Grimm will be doing sooner rather than later, which is why they build up a pretty good relationship with the shop owners. But anyways, regardless, that essentially is where we're ending it. So both him and Crowley are now in a world where they have a massive advantage, which they already did, because they made the most of Hell Night. But now they have a bunch of these tombs that they can go raid, and that's where Act 3, I guess, is going to be coming into part. So by the way, we're not exactly there yet. We're very, very close to being there. We need to go do one more thing. Yeah, which I don't know if will happen next part. Who knows? Probably not. I would doubt not. But there's one more thing that we need to do. We basically need to get... Yeah, I don't want to tell you yet what it is, but there's one more pillar, and it should come pretty soon. And then that's the jumping off point where I think that anybody can have a crazy good time in terms of coming up with like 1,000 different things, because we basically made each precursor pretty okay. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think this was the best explanation and or whatnot, because I kind of rambled through a lot of it, but I don't think this was going to be able to happen otherwise, because this was just super... It's not that complicated, it's just a lot. Because it's something that I had written up ages ago, which was the idea of, okay, so this demigod is inevitably going to come into contact with Grimm and change. And when they change... it's basically going to change the whole format, more or less, of the world. So now this is going to be like where a ton of people are going to go do that. By the way, believe it or not, this wasn't exactly... Yeah, I didn't even intend to do that, but I realized it's kind of reminiscent of... what is it called? What is that? It's an anime that I love so much. Oh, Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? That's what it is. Dimache. It's a fantastic anime, but it's weirdly ended up being similar in terms of like the jumping off point, because that's essentially what it is. And instead of in that show, I think it's just one dungeon, whereas now there's 1,000 dungeons, but there's also 1,000 vendors. So to me, this just gives us a good playground to like mess around with thousands of stories in this world now that is basically set up. But we still have one more thing for our characters and hopefully your characters to jump off from. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your day. There's a subscribe button all the way, or like right over there, and then further that way there's videos. Jesus. Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully you guys enjoy the story as well as the podcast. And in the next time, we will be covering Grim and Crowley stretching their legs, going out in the open day, no longer dark and moody, to meet one of those vendors to see what the heck's up with that. Yes. Good. Thank you and goodbye.